environment that this family is living in is anything but graceful. And she's called Grace. It's anything but graceful. She's called Grace. And the situation is anything but ideal. The story of 1 Samuel is placed in the midst of the period of the Judges. So if you look in the period of the Judges in the Bible, this is the most wicked period that we see in Scriptures. It is just a crazy, dark book, the book of Judges. If we were asked to define the day and age in one sentence or one idea, it would definitely be how God describes it in Scriptures. Here's what he says. If you want to describe the day and age that Hannah lives in, you describe it like this. And everyone did what was right in their own eyes. All right, do you understand how dangerous of a statement that is? Do you understand how dangerous of a statement that is? If everybody does what is right in their own eyes, can you imagine the havoc that would be wreaked because of that mentality? We drive down the interstate and Jacob drives at his comfortable 55 miles an hour because he's not a great driver yet. You know, he's learning. No 15-year-old's the best driver in the world. It's impossible to be a great driver at 15. So he's just now learning how to drive. He's driving at 15. And we don't have speed limits. All we do is say, Ryan, you drive however you feel in your heart. You know, you just do whatever you feel like you can do. How fast would you be driving, David, if I were to tell you just drive however you feel that you can drive? How fast would you be driving? He'd be driving about 80. I would consider that conservative because I wouldn't. 80 is what I drive now. I'm on camera. No, I never drive 80. I'm just kidding. But do you not see the craziness that would ensue if there's no rule? And that's what the book of Judges is. The book of Judges says this. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. By the way, if you read your Facebook page much, you're going to find that today tends to be a lot like that. Well, that doesn't seem to be wrong to me. Great. But you're not the person that decides what is right and wrong. You're not the emperor of what is correct and incorrect. But that's the way they were living in the book of 1 Samuel. If you take a minute, think of what that would imply. It'd be crazy. Can you imagine this morning what life would look like if just the people in here had no moral compass at all and just did what they thought would be right or fair in any situation that came their way? Can you imagine what that would look like? I'm just going to do what I think is fair. By the way, that's a lot of what raising kids is about. Is it not? You start with kids, and the first words they learn are no and mine. Have you ever noticed that? It's funny. In America, all kids learn the words mine as one of those first 5 words, absolutely, no doubt about it, because, man, every kid wants to grab that toy from the other kid and say mine. And if you're in there, now I know that you would never post pictures like this on Facebook, because on Facebook you pretend your kids are perfect. But you've actually seen that demon-possessed child grab that toy from the other one and say mine and have this look on his face where mama's looking at her baby going, she takes after her daddy. And daddy's looking at it going, hey, she takes after her mom. Is that not true? The way it is, that's part of parenting even. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Imagine going to the kids' room this morning or the nursery and saying to them, hey, guys, there's only one rule today. There's one rule for y'all in the nursery today. If you'll all just do what you all think is right in your own eyes. Can you imagine how crazy that nursery room back there would be? I know that because Joshua is in the kids' room. Can you imagine how crazy it would be? Did you know Jessica Halbert kind of like runs the nursery area? Did you know that she's probably seen more kids bite each other? They don't even know what they're like biting each other. Why in the world do they bite each other? Why in the world do they hit? It's impossible. Because they're just doing what's right in their own eyes. But just think, it's easy to think about the nursery or the kids' room, but think what this room would look like if everybody did what was right in their own eyes. See, I don't think that this inspector should be causing me this many problems, so I'm just going to move into my house, and I got some weapons, so I'm just going to take care of my house, because I don't like you coming up to my house and telling me I can't live here. That seems right in my eyes. Can you imagine how crazy our society would be? Well, that was the society that Hannah was living in. And she had this beautiful name called Hannah, which stood for grace, graceful, peaceful, which there was nothing like that going on in those days. I can't even fathom how crazy this little church would be if we were to live like that in here. Not only do we see the life of Hannah in an environment that was crazy, but even her family was anything but perfect. Here's what we find about her family. Her husband's name was Elkanah, and Elkanah had 2 wives. Any of y'all that are married, imagine 2 wives. Imagine the dynamic between 2. You're like, well, those are different days. And by the way, God never approved of this. A lot of people look at the Old Testament and say, well, God said it was cool. No, God didn't say it was cool. But he had 2 wives. You know why? You know why a man could think that he could have 2 wives? Because he just did what was right in his own eyes. I don't really care. I'll just do whatever I think I want to do. So her husband was Elkanah. He had 2 wives. And he had, 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 2 says, and he had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah. The name of the other was Peninnah. See, at least Hannah had a better name. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Hannah had no children. This was never God's plan. But it's the kind of things that men do when they do what they think is right in their own eyes. They're actually a proof case of one of the reasons that a man should not have more than 1 wife. Look at verse 6 and verse 7 that you find here. It says, and her adversary also provoked her sore to make her fret because the Lord had shut up her womb. In other words, Peninnah was a jerk to Hannah all the time and made fun of Hannah because Hannah couldn't have children. That's what that verse is saying. And as he did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Hannah, this lady named Grace, in the middle of that kind of a situation. Her country was anything ideal. Her family was anything but ideal. But today, we're going to say the life of Hannah as we think about what grace looks like in the middle of a disgraceful age. There's so many things that we can learn from the life of Hannah as a mother, and I hope we can walk away today being thankful for the privilege that we've been given of having children. And today's Mother's Day, but can I just say that may we never forget how privileged we are to have kids. And kids, let me just say this, because we got, y'all younger folks in here. Can I just tell you how blessed you are to have parents? Can I just tell you how blessed you are to have a mother, to have a father? And the story of Hannah is the story of a woman that's longing to have a child. In our day and age, we love putting an inordinate premium on the idea of freedom. And because of that, we're waiting later and later to get married in life, later and later to have children in life, because we prize this idea of freedom. In many families, children are actually optional. Many people in secular society see children as a weight to carry around instead of a privilege to be able to raise them and love them. Can I just say this? I believe every parent in the room will agree with me when I say this. When you have a child, your life changes. Okay, is that not a fair statement? Kids, all of y'all heard that? Mm-hmm. Y'all heard that? Like every person in here that's had a child, we know all about it. Life changes. Your schedule is no longer yours. Your time is no longer yours. Your money is no longer yours. And once you get teenage boys, your food is no longer yours. I'm not like, it's all over. Nothing is the same anymore. Nothing's the same anymore. Now, can I just say this? This is the way we view children nowadays, and we've got to be very careful because even any of us parents understand what it's like to complain about how difficult it is to have kids. But let me give you an illustration. I was just thinking this morning about how to illustrate it better. And here's what I thought about. David's dream car is a 2019 Porsche 911. Okay, David, I'm going to buy you this illustration. You understand this is false, right? Okay, so make sure that no, you don't get this video, take it to a lawyer and say, does this have standing in court when a guy says this? I'm going to buy you a Porsche 911 2019. Do you realize how much your freedom is limited when I give you a Porsche 911? Do you realize how much is, for example, I've watched you park that U-Haul out there. You whip that thing around and don't even care about where it goes because you're bigger than anybody else in the place anyway, and you're going to be able to take care of it. You know what? You probably don't even park your car in a. If anybody in here wants to put legs on this illustration, feel free to buy me any Porsche of any year model. Any car even. I don't even care. But you know what? I'm going to give David an incredible gift. But you do understand that David could complain about that, don't you? Do you realize how much it limits my freedom? Do you realize I can't park in the places I used to park? Do you realize I can't just leave it out in the sun all the time? Do you realize because most Americans don't know this, but you know that thing with electric doors that when you pull up to the house and you push that button and it goes up, that your car's supposed to go in there, not all your junk. Like, I didn't know if y'all knew that or not, but like a car is actually supposed to go in there, not everything else that you have. So you know what? You don't have your garage clean. If I give it to David, David's going to go home. He's going to be like, man, getting this car, it was such a pain in the neck. Can you imagine what you would think if you were to listen to David and him explain to you how difficult his life had become because I gave him a Porsche 911? Would we not laugh him out of town if he started doing that? But with kids, we love thinking about how difficult life becomes. And it does. Life is not near as easy. But can I tell you that what you're so worried about is the greatest gift God ever gives you, as he gives you a child to raise up to follow him. David, you know that people would make fun of you, so because of that, you would never, ever, ever even dream of telling everybody how difficult it was to be given such a great gift. But as kids come in our lives, we love talking about how our money's no longer ours, and our food's no longer ours, and our time's no longer ours, and our life is no longer what we thought it was going to be. But what we have to understand is it's a gift. In Hannah, you see a longing for this gift. She desired to have a child. And Hannah's day was the complete opposite of the day we live in America. Because the way we live is, hey, if we could just have a little bit more time, if we could have a little bit more freedom. Hannah's day was the complete opposite, because in her day, to be infertile was the ultimate tragedy for a married woman. The only way that a woman could provide a way for the family name to continue was by having a child. You had to be able to have a child. Hannah could do many things, but she couldn't do that one thing that she longed to do more than anything else. She longed to have a child. Let's turn in our Bibles to 1 Samuel today, and we're going to see what we can learn from this amazing story of Hannah. Number one, you find her longing. What she wanted more than anything else was a child. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 8, the Bible says, and we're going to read quite a bit today. Verse 8, the Bible says, then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why weepest thou? And why aren't you eating? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? He says, is it not better to have me and that relationship than having children? So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord, and she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. And this is just a constant pain that she was dealing with. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you'll indeed look down on my affliction, on the affliction of your handmaid, if you remember me and not forget me, but you could give me a handmaid, a man-child, then I'll give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. Eli looked at it and he goes, what's going on there? Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. She's sitting there, her lips are moving, and Eli goes, is she drunk? And Eli said unto her, how long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thine wine from thee. And Hannah answered and said, no, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I've poured out my soul before the Lord. I came before God, and I'm pouring out every single part of my being before God. Count not thy handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherunto. Then Eli answered and said, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. And she said, let thine handmaid find grace in thy sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. And they rose up in the morning early and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived, she bare a son. She called his name Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. So Hannah's sitting here longing, desiring, wanting to have children. She goes and she prays. She's so concerned about having a child, she can't even eat. If you're here today, I know, along with you, if you're here today, I know how difficult Mother's and Father's Day can be in a church setting if you can't have kids. I know how difficult that can be. And I don't know how difficult that day can be because of something I've read, but we dealt with that as well. We'll never forget the 8 years of begging God for children and not being able to have them. When I would read the story of Hannah, I would read it literally with tears streaming down my face because I understood her pain. I understood her agony. I understood her desire, wanting to have children and couldn't have children. Hannah finds herself with that burden. She finds herself feeling that exact same way. She's made fun of. She rolls over and over in bed at night with a deep down desire to have children, but she's not able to have children. One of the most difficult things for us when we were trying to have children was listening to others complain about how much time they didn't have because of their child. Like we would sit there and we would listen to parents go, well, man, if you just knew how tough life was because we have kids. And my wife and I would talk, we'd be like, we would give up everything to be able to have kids. We would sit across from each other. We would lay in bed at night. We would cry ourselves to sleep for 8 years, begging God to have kids, and we couldn't have kids. Listening to them talk about how they just wish they could go back to having a full night's sleep. I would pray and say, God, I would love to have a night where I couldn't sleep to take care of a child that you would give us. If you'll just give us that which other people see as a burden, Lord, it would be awesome. That's the way we would look at it. When we adopted Jacob and Hannah, Jacob was 19 months old. And so 19 months old, and while I can say that I totally understand the complaining of parents nowadays, I wish I could take you back to those days. 19 months old, and Jacob sitting there. Jacob would wake up in the middle of the night and start looking around. And he would be in his crib, and he'd sit up in bed, and you just this look of being petrified. He would look around the room, and he would start screaming, a blood-curdling scream at the top of his lungs because he didn't know where he was. Not some baby cry, not some bratty cry of I don't like going to sleep, but a serious, I'm scared to death of everything that's around me because I don't even know where I'm at. 19 months old, and he did this for about 3 weeks every morning, anywhere between 2 and 5 in the morning. By the way, while dealing with that, we went from 0 kids to a 19-month-old that couldn't sleep and a 7-week-old that didn't even know what sleep was, I think. So we were dealing with 2 of them at a time. We didn't go from 0 to 1. We went from 0 to 2 and 0 to 2 at different age groups with different, y'all have all watched this. The Trotters have these 2 different, Judson's way different than Berkeley. You parent them totally differently, and we're like from 0 to 100 miles an hour. He did about 3 weeks, and most of the time I would let Andrea deal with Jacob, because I would let her do that. It was all self-sacrificial on my part. I wanted her to have bonding time with Jacob. That was the only reason that I did that. And I still remember every night she'd take him out of his crib and she would squeeze him tight. And we had a chair there in the room, and she would look at him and she would squeeze him and she'd say, hey, buddy, you need to understand you're home now and your mama loves you. You're home now and your mama loves you. And the funny thing was this, buddy, you're home, your mama loves you. I remember listening to her do this time and time again, and the first time it took close to 2 hours to get him to calm down. You're home, and your mama loves you, and she would hug him, she would squeeze him tight, and it took him, over the 3 weeks at the end, it was taking 3 or 4 minutes. Andrea had gotten it down to a science, but the funny thing is, I'd go in there and look at this baby that was screaming for 2 hours straight, and I didn't see a scowl on her face. I saw a smile on her face. I'm like, who in the world would smile when that happens? And you know who will smile? The one that understands the longing to have children. The desire to have children. And that's where Hannah was. I saw a woman with a tear in her eye and a small smile on her lips, that she was finally given the privilege of being the mother of this amazing child. This was the position that Hannah was in. She desired more than anything to have a child to love, but she couldn't have one. She couldn't have one. And it would seem almost as laughable for us today when we talk about David complaining about having a great car as it would to Hannah listening to people talk about how difficult life was with children. Now, let me just say, I do understand the difficulties of parenthood. And I do understand that we don't get our calendars back. And I do understand, I asked my dad the other day, I said, Dad, at what point does it feel like that you don't have to worry anymore? And he says, I don't know. I'm still waiting on that. I'm like, I'm 42 years old. I've been pretty good kid at not asking for stuff and not being the needy kid. And he said, I got 4 kids. And let me just tell you, still, everything changes when you have kids, absolutely. You can sense her pain and her anguish in these verses. Can I just tell you today, there's no other gift in the world as amazing as the children God's given you. There's no other gift in the world as amazing as the gift of these children that God has given you. Sadly, today, many people lament children instead of celebrating them. They view them as something that gets in the way of their life, of what they want to do. But can I say this? If you truly view kids that way, you don't understand what God has given you, and it is an affront to God to see your children the way you're looking at them. Because God's given us the gift of being parents. All other jobs pale in comparison to the importance of the job of raising children to love, honor, and serve our God. Nothing cooler in the world than looking down at this good-looking boy and his ugly dad. Nothing like just watching, because we have to understand how amazing of a gift what we have that God's given us. And it is almost as laughable to talk about how difficult being a parent is as how David would talk about how difficult it was getting this great car. You must understand that it's a gift from God. Your children are going to grow up to have the same priorities, the same thoughts, the same struggles as you. So as you raise your children, never underestimate the importance of your growth. You must grow, because here's the deal. Berkeley's going to turn into Morgan. And that ought to excite Morgan, but it also ought to petrify Morgan. Because I know that, I don't know this as a pastor, but Morgan's probably not perfect. Just saying, it's probably not perfect. Like you've got 1 or 2 things on that list of things that need to change, maybe. I know I've got plenty of things, and here's what we have to understand. Your children are going to be like you, and that ought to scare you to death and excite you all at one time. Those things that irritate you the most in your children is normally nothing more than a direct reflection of that same problem in your life. I can't stand how hard-headed Jacob is. He drives me crazy sometimes. And my wife loves looking at me and just rolling her eyes. Like really? He's too hard-headed? Really, Chris? Like, is that? Wait, you really want to go there with that? I won't even talk about Hannah, because, see, then I would be getting in trouble. And today's Mother's Day, so I don't want to do that. Those things that irritate you the most usually tend to be a reflection of that same problem that you have in your life. Hannah longed to have children and understood the amazing gift that would be, so she made a promise that if God gave her a child, here's what she would do. She would dedicate that child to God. That would be what she would do, dedicate that child to God. So look, number 2, you find her loving. First, you find her longing and how she longed for a child. Second, you find her loving. And 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 21 to 28, the man Elkanah and his house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I'm not going to go up until the child is weaned. And then I'll bring him, and he may appear before the Lord, and there he's going to abide forever. And Elkanah, her husband, said unto her, Do what seemeth thee good. Tarry until thou have weaned him. Only the Lord established his word. So the woman abode, and gave her son suck until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bullocks and 1 ephah of flour and a bottle of wine, and brought him into the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. And they slew a bullock and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition for which I asked of him. Therefore I have also lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. Hannah goes and she stayed at the home of Samuel. She loved him. She cared for him. She taught him. As he was a baby, she taught him. She cared for him. She goes before Eli and reminds him of who she was and how she was raising him. She was raising him not so that he could be cool or popular or even that he could have a good job. That was not the reason that she raised him. I wish our church would understand that when we raise our children, you're raising them for the wrong reason. You're raising them hoping they get a good job. You're raising them hoping that they find a good soulmate. But you need to raise them understanding that serving God is the reason that you're raising your children. She was raising him to bring glory to God in his life. And this is the way that she showed her love to her child. There are many things in this life that you can give your children. We as parents want to give our children those things that we could never have. Is that not true? You want to give your kids what you never had. Well, I was never able to have this, and you want to give them what you weren't able to have. But we've got to understand there's nothing more important than teaching them how to love their God. Did you know that if a child loves God, he'll find the right mate? Teach them to love God, they're going to find the right mate. Did you know if you teach them to love God, he'll find the right job? But we've got to focus in on the things that really matter. Notice that I didn't say going to church. Because here's the sad part about many parents is this, is we think that it's the job of the church to teach the kids to love God. It's not. That is not learned in church. It's learned at home. I think going to church should be a priority for anyone who calls themselves a believer, but church is secondary. Teach them to love God. We must show them that our life is wrapped up in our God. Look at these next verses here in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 18 and 19. It says, "But Samuel ministered before the Lord being a child, girded with a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat. She brought it to him from year to year. When she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice, she gave her child to serve God, but then she kept loving him year after year." She loved him consistently, as you can see in those following verses. Every year she would come up and bring him a coat that she had made for him. This wasn't some ploy that she came up with to free herself of her child. She continually loved him. Number 3, what you find about is her leaving. You find her leaving, and don't have time to read the verses, but 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1 through 10, what you find is this. Hannah sings a song to the Lord. If you notice, her focus was not on anything more than on God. She did what she knew she could do, and then she left the rest in the hands of God. Can I just say this? As parents, this is where I fail the most. I know y'all never fell as parents, and y'all are the perfect parents probably, but this guy up here talking, he's anything but a perfect parent. But you know where I fail? I always fail by looking at the results and looking and saying my kids aren't doing exactly what I've taught them to do, but I don't really look near as much as what I plant and how I'm planting into them and how I'm teaching them and what I'm doing to help them grow. It's our job. We need to know we are to do what we know to do. We are to teach our children. We're to raise them up in the way that they should go. It doesn't mean that our kids are going to always follow our footsteps. Can I tell you that you can teach your kid until you're blue in the face, and sometimes he's just not going to do what he was taught to do. You're like, I can't believe kids will do that. Now, let me ask you a question. How many times you, as a kid of your parents, have not done what your parents taught you to do? Any of y'all want to fess up to that one? How many times would your parents not be proud of what you have done? I know that, well, my dad never had to deal with that, but I'm just saying, or he had to a lot. That doesn't mean they're always going to follow in our footsteps. We must concern ourselves more with how we are investing in their lives than how well they are obeying and following our direction. Obedience is theirs to choose. Instructing is mine to choose. Loving is mine to choose. Investing is mine to choose. I have got to do what only I can do. The problem with parenting many times is we want to correct all the time and invest very little time. We want to tell them they shouldn't lie instead of teaching them what the Bible says about lying way before it comes time to lie. We want to look at it and we want to go, you did this wrong. Come here, you're punished because you did this wrong. And yeah, kids should be punished for doing wrong, absolutely. But they do wrong many times because we've not done our part in instructing. God gave us the children we have, and it's our responsibility to invest in them. It's our responsibility to teach them to love God. It's our responsibility to teach, and it's their responsibility to obey. It's very young children, we make them obey. You know, when a child is the age of a Judson, you tell Judson's sitting there, and he wants to touch something he shouldn't touch, and you go, no, Judson, and you take him, and you move his hand, and he tries again. You can force him to obey. Is that not a fair statement? You can force Judson to obey. You're like, I told you not to touch that. And honestly, I could be eating popcorn with my right hand and with my left hand be able to correct Judson, but try that with Jacob. It doesn't work near as easily as it does with Judson. So we teach them to obey one way as they're Judson's age, but as they grow, they change. They change, and as they change, we've got to trust in that which we have instructed and how we have loved and how we have impacted and how we have invested in their lives. Hannah's entire song that she sang was the one that focused on the only one that holds all things in his hands. She goes, God, you're amazing. God, only you have done this. What Hannah doesn't even know is that her son is going to mark the change of the tide of those crazy days. That crazy day that happened where everybody did what was right in their own eyes. Guess what's going to mark the change in all of that? It's a little boy named Samuel. That little boy is what God is going to use to change the tide of the history of mankind that we find in the book of Judges. Babies are God's announcement that he knows the need, he cares about his people, and he's working on their behalf. Let me close today by saying a few things. I know many of you think that you can only take 3 or 4 more mommies before you can't handle it anymore. Any mother in here ever felt that? Mommy, 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 mommy. You're like, is that ever going to end? I do understand that. Understand that God has given you the privilege of having children. And it is a privilege, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but it is a privilege. They aren't a drain. They aren't a pain, and for the life of me, I can't come up with another word that rhymes with pain or drain to make me sound like a rapper, but I tried. So I do understand it. Can I encourage you to go to your God today and thank him for the children you have? If David were to complain right and left about the car I gave him, I think David should come to me and go, I'm very sorry, Chris. I have been the ultimate jerk because I have pretended that what you gave me was more of a burden than it was a blessing. And I don't feel that. Because see, I could walk over to David and say, David, I know you've dealt with the difficulty and the weight of driving a Porsche 911 around for 3 months now, and I feel so bad for you. If you just give me the keys back, I'll take that weight off of your shoulder. And David would be like, are you kidding me? It's time that we go to God and just say, God, thank you for the children you've given me. Can I ask you to ask him to give you the wisdom to teach them to grow up to honor and serve him? Here's a truth to consider. You will never have a better disciple than your children. No, this church, we're all about discipling. We're all about going through the scriptures. We're all about teaching people the word of God. Can I tell you that you will never have, ever, until the cows come home, ever have someone that will be a better disciple than the children that you raise. They were making fun of me last week. I was at a pastor's event at my dad's church, and they said, this is Austin's oldest son. And they said, you could know that by me telling you, or you could talk to him for 10 seconds. You'd know the exact same thing. I hear Justin Trotter preach, and I'm like, well, there's Mark, just not quite as many muscles. Or it's good. But when you listen to Justin, you're like, of course, that's Mark. You're never going to have a better disciple than your children. I could try and preach like Mark Trotter all day long. And let me just tell you something. I'm never going to be able to preach like Mark Trotter. But I can tell you there's going to be one dude sitting in this church that'll preach like his dad big time if you give him enough time. That's going to be Justin. You'll never have a better disciple than your child. Love them and teach them all that you can for them because you only have a limited time to influence them the way that you can today. There are times when I'm sure my wife misses holding her little boy screaming in the nursery. She can't hold him anymore unless he wants to be held, and I hadn't seen that happen yet. He could hold her almost. It doesn't happen like that anymore. You only have that limited time. And here's what's funny. You honestly, I walk in here, and Lily looks at me. She stretches her arms out. She wants me to hug her, and I think, you know what? I miss this. I'm so glad I get my fixes on Sundays because I don't know that I can handle another one. But I'll get my fix on Sundays at least. You're going to miss it. So appreciate where you're at now. Because guess what? It's over soon. I don't know about being over. I don't know what it's like when they move out of your house. But Jacob hadn't woke up in the middle of the night and screamed in a long time. Actually, no, that's not. Things change. Teach them all you can. You have a limited time to influence them. Can I say this? Realize that family is always your first. Family is always your first ministry. Family is always your first ministry. It's your most important ministry. Do all that you know to do, but then learn to leave the rest in the hands of God. I can't dictate how Andrew will turn out, how Joshua will turn out, how Hannah will turn out, how Jacob will turn out, but I can dictate what I pour into their lives and beg God to do with what I put in there what only God can do. Do all that you know, but leave the rest in his hands. Mothers, we're blessed to have you today. Can I tell you that you're doing a lot better than you think you are? I know you're exhausted, and I know you're like, man, I just don't know how much. Just understand something. You're doing better than you think you are. Teach your kids to love God. Today we have some gifts for you. I saw this meme on Facebook this week, and I thought it was a good one to put up today. Is that meme in there, Bill? There you go. Mom, we've hired a few people to fill in for you a while you relax on Mother's Day. And that's exactly what we understand who mothers are. You got your taxi driver, you have a nurse, you have a teacher, you have just all kinds of things back there. Hire some people to take your place. Moms, we appreciate what you do. You guys are awesome. And so Becky Bryant made you guys this thing today. It's a bath bomb. And on it she put, "You're the bomb." And so there they are back in the back. Pick one up as we leave today. And there's different, okay, see, I almost said flavors. Those aren't flavors, are they? What are they? Scents. Thank you. You know, somebody that had scents would know that they were scents and not flavors, but just so the different scents. And there's a little card to tell you what they are. If you want, you can take one today. Thank you for being good moms. Thank you for loving your kids. Thank you for teaching your kids to love God. That is a major priority. I hope you go home today knowing how much we love you and appreciate all that you do. We're going to pray, and then I'm just going to come up and we'll sing and be dismissed. And please stop by afterwards and pick up something. Thank you for being here with us on Mother's Day. Lord,